Welcome to this special bonus episode of Interconnected. As you've learned by now, this topic is huge, and the science keeps leading us into new and fascinating directions. Most of the experts we've interviewed would agree the future of medicine has the microbiome playing a central role. And for this episode, let's talk about soil, our inner soil. Everything you take in is a part of your inner soil, from food to toxins. Your microbiome is cultivating and processing to survive. This episode is about knowing where your food is coming from, why it's all connected, and how you can eat for better health.
The way I look at it, Food 1.0 is about survival. If you can get enough calories to fill your belly, then that's success. And for most people in the world, that's still where it's at. And that's been the reality for most of human history. In the modern era, we're dominated primarily by Food 2.0, where the goal is commerce. We've made the buying and selling of food into the central economic engine of the food industry. And so we've got an incredible number of tastes and textures and cuisines and foods from all over the planet at our fingertips. Unfortunately, Food 2.0 is morally bankrupt. It's brought us a food system that is devoid of fiber and vitamins and minerals and nutrients, and that's packed full of sugar and junk. So I say we need Food 3.0, where the central organizing principle is health. Health for our bodies and health for our planet. And I think there are plenty of healthy profits to be made in Food 3.0. It's just that they come from healthy food.
Unfortunately, in our race to have higher yields and produce more, we have jumped to what I would call the drug analogy, where we've become addicted to fertilizer and pesticides to create the amount of food we're producing. Unfortunately, we're still losing 4 tons of topsoil per acre per year on our agricultural land in the United States. So when we think about that healthy topsoil as our means, the biology in that exists there, as our means to have the minerals and the healthy food created, we're depleting that extremely fast.
And then, progressively over time, you can see that we're getting less and less from our plants. Why? Why is that? Well, it turns out we've been using industrial agricultural techniques, right? We're plowing more, tilling more, we're doing things that actually kill the bugs. But we're also spraying ubiquitous amounts of chemicals everywhere. And these chemicals, whether they're an herbicide or insecticide, they're cidal. We kill the least of these, our brethren, right off the bat when we're spraying cidal agents. So we knock out certain species of bugs in the soil. So when we knock out those certain species of bugs in the soil, we knock out their functionality. So they can no longer now interact with the plant roots like they used to and protect that plant from disease, give that plant the nutrients it needs to survive and thrive. So we end up with less nutrient density in the plants, and we end up with more plant disease.
Then we end up having to spray more pesticides, which then kill the bugs in us.
So the same thing goes with the plant and with the microbes in the soil. In fact, when you think about it, all the time doctors will call, well, not all the time, but sometimes you hear scientists call our gut microbiome our inner soil, because they function, they do some of the same kinds of things as soil microbes do for plants. But if you intervene by cutting off that relationship, by interrupting that relationship, by adding fertilizers or using fungicides, then the diversity diminishes, and the viability of the plant and its nutritional load goes down.
If we want to have highly nutritious food, we have to have the biology doing a huge majority of the work getting those minerals available for the plant. If the biology is not there, the plant is essentially naked, the root is naked in the soil, and it's not getting so many of those trace elements that are really vital for our health and the health of the planet.
One of the things we are doing is, in pursuit of taste and sales, we are at times reducing nutritional load. So the minerals and vitamins in vegetables in the United States the load has decreased by up to 10% since World War II. And that's because of our breeding programs, but also because of our growing programs, because the soil microbiome, a diversity of microbes, delivers all kinds of micronutrients that the plant needs. I mean, it's not just phosphorus and nitrogen, but other things that the plant needs. In fact, for us to presume that we know everything the plant needs is what's mistaken in the first place. I mean, it's sort of like our hubris is ultimately the reason why we're getting diabetes and obesity.
And you see miles and miles of bare soil, and we just think that's what farming is. But bare soil means no carbon being pumped into the ground to keep those microorganisms fed and alive. It also means they're burning up. And then we till the soil. So the mycorrhizal fungal networks that are helping keep the plant healthy and able to access minerals, we rip those up and they oxidize and they turn back into CO2 as well. Little quick science lesson. For the system to work, plants need to be pumping sugars into the ground to feed the microbiology, right? Like photosynthesis takes carbon, connects it with hydrogen, it makes carbohydrates, and the plant pushes those out of its root to feed the microorganisms in the soil. So when we see that tilled, bare soil that's very typical of most farming systems, we are literally destroying the system that pumps the carbon in and makes the system healthy, and we're actively killing the biology that makes those plants be able to prosper and thrive. Compare that to a biological system where we're keeping the soil covered with cover crops year-round, making sure that there's less bare ground. We're actively feeding the soil carbon, and we're allowing for this extremely spongy and amazingly designed technology to function. And then our plants and our food that we create becomes much more mineral rich. So we're dealing with dead soil where you have a very low likelihood that you're going to have nutritious food.
The products that are made by some of these foods, like processed flour and things like that, a lot of sugar-based products that are heavy in sugar, we're paying for those delicious tastes by our health, because sugars and processed flour, those foods get dumped into our bloodstream, and we're not feeding as much by not eating organic vegetables and whole grains and less sugar. We're not feeding the fiber fermenters, the microbes in our guts that produce all kinds of important molecules that keep us healthy and maintain our weight, that keep us healthy across the board.
And in this context, no wonder 2/3 of our population is overweight or obese. 1/3 of our kids are expected to get diabetes in their lifetime. We have 8 million people a year dying of cancer, 14 million a year dying of heart disease, and all of this could be prevented. We know how to do so much better. We have studies showing that over half of the medical spending in the world today is on chronic disease treatment, and most of that, 80% or more of that, is fueled by what we eat.
There's also evidence showing that populations in non-developed countries or in the developing world have more diverse microbiomes. They eat different foods, obviously have been exposed to different environmental stimuli, haven't been exposed to antibiotics and preservatives like we have in the US, Europe, and Japan. And so there they have diversity in their microbiomes as well. So I think putting these pieces together, both in terms of diversity correlating with health as well as in the developing world, there's this hypothesis that's been proposed that in modern lifestyle we are losing organisms, we are losing particular microbes generation after generation. And since we know from a number of studies that these microbes provide beneficial activities or beneficial functions, one can imagine that by losing particular microbes or class of microbes, we're also losing the benefits that they endow upon us.
How did we get into this mess? How did the food system take such a dark turn?
The problem with the current food system is that we've got a medical industry that acts as if food didn't matter. The average physician gets 19 hours of education in nutrition in their entire medical training. And we've got a food system that acts like your health didn't matter. Most of our food companies are focused on making profits more than on keeping us healthy. So in the midst of that, we have a crisis. We have a food system that is saturated with pesticides and hormones and antibiotics and GMOs and chemicals and added sugars, and that is devoid of fiber and vitamins and minerals and nutrients and prebiotics and probiotics and all the things that we need for a healthy digestion and a healthy body and a healthy life.
So how does life jump out of the soil? Is a huge question that I think heretofore has gotten way too little attention, right? It seems like probably the most important question we could ask is, as living beings, how does life start? And the interesting thing is how simple it is ultimately. All you need to begin life, and it needs to begin in the soil, either in the soil of the dirt around us or the soil of our intestines, and getting this process started in a human being or in a cow or a sheep or any organism that's going to spring forth life. The building blocks for life begin at water itself. Water carries information in a very powerful way. This is a very new science, and I'm not going to go into great detail because we're going to quickly run out of good data, and all we know is we're getting more questions with every time we ask about water. The water is the beginning of it, and the water seems to interact with the nutrients in a very unique fashion, that it can actually carry information of the nutrients themselves into the organism, even if the nutrient doesn't ultimately get there. There's a field of medicine called homeopathy that's come out of Germany and been popularized over the world over the last decades. Powerful clinical findings come out of this reality where you're just delivering water with the signal of an herb or some essence of nutrient. And we see this in the farming environment. If you start to kill the water structure, or you start to get dehydration of the soil or your gut, nothing can get inside the body correctly. Even if you can get into the bloodstream, you can't get it inside a human cell where it's needed to build something.
And so over time, one may imagine that rise in a certain types of diseases may be the outcome of the absence of bacteria. And this is a paradigm shift because we all, I believe, grew up thinking microbes were bad and they just wanted to cause harm, but we now know that's not the case. So the new paradigm is that the absence of microbes may be a risk factor for disease, the absence of good bacteria.
And so it begins at good water. And to get good water on a farm, you need to not dump a bunch of chemicals in it. Anytime you add a chemical, you're not only going to add a potential toxin, you're screwing up the water structure to now carry a message to the biology around it of toxicity. So I think we're going to find out that, yeah, chemicals are bad, but when chemicals hit water and interact with water structure, it kills the ability of the water to now carry nutrition into the organism.
So if you spray a bunch of antibiotic on food that you feed to cows or sheep or chickens, the antibiotics get picked up in the tissues and the fat of the animal, and then you get that in your gut and in your own tissues. But in the meantime, all these bacteria that are present in farms actually become resistant to antibiotics, and they shift to become basically angry bacteria. And angry bacteria, they come out fighting. They can make hundreds of times more toxins. For instance, spraying certain herbicides, even things like glyphosate, on crops can make a soil fungus make hundreds of times more mycotoxin. This is a toxin made by a fungus or a mold or a yeast that directly poisons your gut bacteria and directly poisons your cell bacteria. For instance, because we've been spraying this herbicide on our corn, you think, well, why does that matter? Well, the herbicide is an antibiotic as well, glyphosate. What it did is it caused soil fungus called Fusarium to migrate into the roots of the corn. So now it's making toxins that affect our biology and it's putting them into the corn. So the corn doesn't look moldy, but our interaction with the soil microbes has actually changed the aggressiveness of soil fungus. So now it's affecting our bacteria in our gut when you eat corn that looks like it should be fine.
We're now at around 30 million pounds of antibiotics in our animals. That's primarily in the pork, chicken, and beef industries. And those three industries consuming now 4 or 5 times as much antibiotic as humans do from their doctors, all of that residue is getting into the soil, of course. So we're wiping out the microbiome of the gut of the chicken, the pig, and the cow, and their feces is now profoundly screwed up. In fact, it's illegal to utilize the stool from pigs as compost because it's gotten so toxic. It's so loaded with chemicals, it's so loaded with antibiotics, it's not allowed to be put on soil. It's not even allowed to cross state lines right now, it's so toxic. And so nobody wants the waste of these animals because we've so destroyed their microbiome. And then the granddaddy of all antibiotics on the planet right now is something called glyphosate. glyphosate happens to be the active ingredient in the famous weed killer, which is Roundup. We are currently pouring 4 billion pounds of Roundup and glyphosate worldwide. 4 billion versus a mere 30 million pounds of antibiotic in our animal industry in the United States, and 7 million pounds. And so the United States certainly over the last 30 years has taken the bulk of that toxicity of Roundup and that weed killer into our system. And the interesting thing about a farming practice in which we start with antibiotic is that we are annihilating the microbiome within the soil, which is having the exact same effect on the plants that would try to grow in that soil as we try to grow out of the soil of our gut.
A really cool parallel that most aren't familiar with is comparing our gut, how it works to access the food that's traveling through it, and how a root works in a plant to access the food. And they both count on this microbiome, the microbiology. So if we look at a root, for example, it's not the root. Let's say this is the tip of the root. It's not actually the root that's doing a lot of the harvesting and accessing of the minerals in the soil substrate. The root exudes sugars out of itself to feed, imagine a halo around this root where all of these bacterial colonies, all these things are living, and what they're doing is they're the ones that are putting out the enzymes and harvesting these minerals in the soil substrate, making those minerals available for the plant to actually uptake. And that's what's going to make the healthy plant, the healthy food that the plant creates. Vice versa, if we look at a gut, it's not that the gut is just somehow getting the food in here and accessing the minerals for it. We're actually getting feeding from the other side of the gut wall. The feeding is coming through to feed that microbiome and the biology in there and the bacterial colonies. And they're doing the processing of that kale, for example, and making it so that that kale mineral and all those elements are available for the uptake in our gut. So it's this inverse relationship where literally we're getting signals and feeding of the bacterial or any of the microbiome colonies, different biology, that are doing the work that are making these minerals accessible for a plant or a human. So it's a really cool similarity.
So would you say it's almost like a mirrored process between the soil and the gut?
So nature has a pretty consistent law where biodiversity is good, right? And over the last 100 years of human existence, we've been at war with that diverse biology. Anything from our farming systems using chemical pesticides and fertilizers to the extreme monocropping systems that we have, and then looking at our own biology inside of ourselves where we're taking things when we're sick to target one pest and killing a plethora of other things in our body that were there to help us and were helping us. When we look at regenerating a farm system or a land system or regenerating our own bodies, we now know that when we increase biology, the general biodiversity, we're going to have a healthier system.
It's only been in the last, 30 years or something that the scientific community is saying, whoa, that's just a small percentage of the bacteria that are out there. Lots and lots of them seem to be doing really important jobs for us, for soil, for plants, and for the atmosphere, for that matter. In cycling nutrients and maintaining ratios of gases in the atmosphere. And it's happening on a planet-wide scale as well. Their impact, microbial life impacts our world on a planet scale as well as on the tiny scale of one cell. But that said, there's, we still have to define what we are, and that's why a little microbiology really helps. This wonderful microbiologist, Moselio Schachter, said to me, Eugenia, half the world is microbial. If you don't know a little microbiology, you can't know half of yourself.
Now, the problem is, if you get conventional produce, oftentimes they're spraying chemicals that can kill bugs. Whether it's an herbicide, insecticide, it's a cidal agent. So having your own home garden where hopefully you do your own compost or you find compost from a reputable source that doesn't have any chemical residues in it, is the solution. Even if you can only do on your patio in an apartment complex some sort of trough, you're growing your own food. And just by doing that, it totally shifts your consciousness. You realize you're connected to this thing called life, this thing called nature, this thing that we all innately came from and now are moving away from.
There's an ancient saying by Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below. We're seeing a parallel between what's happening in the soil and what's happening in our bodies. Life springs forth from these root nodules, and the soil bacteria help extract minerals from the earth that create healthy, vibrant soil. This then makes for healthy plants, which we consume. And if we eat animals, we eat those plants. Here's some key takeaways from this segment. The root exudes sugars out of itself to feed soil bacteria. Mycorrhizal fungal networks are helping keep the plant healthy. What's missing is the complex array of minerals, enzymes, and cofactors produced by the soil bacteria. Phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen are added by conventional farmers to drive yields. Aspergillosis fusarium is an invasive fungus in the root system of most traditional corn. It kills good bacteria in our bodies. Make sure you get the Interconnected Home Gardening Guide along with our fermentation guide. Again, the story may sound grim, but you're a few good moves away from being right back in the flow of life and health. I sincerely hope you're enjoying these amazing insights into the microbiome and how choosing the right foods is so important to our health. You're learning this, right? So right now, I want to take the opportunity to let you know how you could own the incredible set that we've put together during this live launch. Click the link below this video and you get all the details on how you can access some of our amazing bonuses, which I just talked about, including the gardening guide and our fermentation guide, plus you're going to help us because the proceeds will help us support regenerative agriculture for future generations. We're very involved in this, we care about this, and we care about you. So Interconnected is changing the course of medicine. We are carrying this story forward, and you're going to discover these insights in your own life and put them to work in your home so that you can help yourself heal quickly, safely, and naturally. So click the link below and check out our limited time discount offer. It's only available while these episodes are live. So come back in a few days and it's gone. Why risk it? Click the link below and find out how you can get access to this groundbreaking series for life. Going natural with your food will help build a healthier microbiome, a healthier you, and a healthier planet. Through our series, we've heard so much about probiotics and prebiotics. Now, we'll take a look at fermentation, a natural food process that offers many health benefits.
So fermented foods are the foods that are preserved naturally, mostly utilizing microorganisms. We utilize bacteria and yeasts to break down these foods into a stable state. There's a few different categories of fermented foods. Some fermented foods like bread, cheese, these are designed to help make that food more assimilable and maybe even a little bit more tasty. So we're not really fermenting bread to make it more preserved. We're just making it tastier and easier to digest.
So everywhere you go around the globe, you'll see fermented stuff everywhere. Whether you're in the United Kingdom or somewhere in Germany, you go in somebody's little root cellar and there's something bubbling there, some sort of kraut or vegetable or something, or yogurt, whatnot. Or you go to Alaska and some of the indigenous cultures will bury seabird eggs until they're just rotten and gross. Or you go over to Asia and they've got some sort of soybean paste that's rotting. And we think, oh, gross, it's just, but the cultures in those areas recognize that if they want to have longevity, they want to avoid some sort of intestinal upset, they have to include these particular things. I had this professor in graduate school, and he says, hey, gang, wait. We harbor trillions of organisms. They guide who we are, what we do, how we detox, everything. If we don't think that everywhere we go, we should bring some of those outside organisms into our intestinal tract, we're naive. You should really be lacto-fermenting or fermenting yogurt or something with the air with the environment in which you go. Everybody else does it. Go to India. I mean, they're doing it. There's going to be some yogurt on the side. There's going to be something from that specific area. And the genius, he said, is this. He says, look, these microbes have adapted to survive in this particular environment with this moisture, with this barometric pressure, with this temperature. Like, why wouldn't you want their genius inside your body? So you might argue then, if you travel, when in Rome, eat as the Romans do, right? When we travel around the globe, eat as those particular people do, right? So you can thrive in that particular environment.
There's a category that I call the functional ferments, and these are the ones that contain probiotics. These are the ones that are the most important when we're talking about the microbiome. So functional ferments are things like dairy kefir, water kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi. They all have this sour flavor because what's associated with these foods is the lactic acid bacteria. We call those LABs. It's a whole category of bacteria that produces this sour substance that, interestingly to me, is also a natural antimicrobial. So it prevents foodborne pathogens, and as you eat a food that contains these probiotics and contains that sour lactic acid, you're also altering the environment to where it's more favorable for the LABs to live, it's more favorable for good bacteria in general to live, and it's less favorable for the pathogenic bacteria and the ones that are taking over so many people's digestive systems today.
I feel it's super ironic that only now are we discovering about the microbiome in modern medicine. Because if you look at our history, and history repeats itself, the Italians would stomp on grapes and the bacteria on their foot would create fermentation and create wine. Practices like sauerkraut and kimchi, like they permeate, fermentation permeates throughout all of our cultures from the beginning of time, in the Bible, biblical, all over the place, right? Sourdough bread, all these things. I find it ironic that we don't, medicine doesn't take it into account how important the bugs that live symbiotically with us, the impact that they have on our lives, right? Because we are constantly surrounded by them. They're inside of us. They're on the outside of us. There isn't anything that's closer to us than these bugs. They are part of us, right? So it's finally, thankfully, it is becoming known. But I think it should have been discovered a long time ago.
I was on a low FODMAP diet, and FODMAP is fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. Essentially, they're short-chain carbohydrates that are easily fermented in your gut. And if you have a bacterial overgrowth, it's essentially feeding these bad guys. I did a lot of visualization, so in my mind I felt, well, having FODMAPs, it could be as innocuous as agave or xylitol in your gum. That feeds these bad bacteria. So essentially, I had to understand that an apple, while being healthy, is a high FODMAP food. And that was the hardest thing for me because I love apples. So cutting out those short-chain carbohydrates, I started eating oranges. I never ate oranges. Now, I start my day with an orange. And now I'm back to eating apples. So essentially, FODMAPs are foods that are short-chain carbs that are ferment in your gut. I introduced fermented foods into my diet. I am a huge proponent of kraut. I eat an ounce of fermented kraut daily. When I travel, I pack it in my suitcase. When I say I kraut, I'm not going to the non-refrigerated section and getting a gallon jug of old kraut. I buy live cultured fermented beet kraut. I just happen to love that because it's low sodium. There's a million different options. There's kombucha, there's carrot kraut, and typically you can buy that at a store, but it has to be refrigerated and it has to say live cultures. So it's not the kraut that you might get, that's been sitting on the shelf, not refrigerated. This is something that is a live culture. And I have to say, for the first time in my entire life, I eliminate daily. I am in tune to it. I realize when I don't, I'm irritable. And it's become something that I expect, and it's part of my self-care. And every day I'm in disbelief that I'm in this body because I have gone from sickness to health, and I did it because I was persistent. I didn't accept the status quo and just take medications as a Band-Aid, and I wanted the truth. And I have so much gratitude for the people that have been helping me and guiding me.
Kimchi, sauerkraut, dairy kefir, those are my top 3 recommendations for probiotic-rich fermented foods. When we're talking about kefir grains and we're talking about any of these scobies, which is a starter culture for fermented foods, when you're dealing with a SCOBY, you're actually dealing with something that humans cannot make on their own. These are communities of microorganisms that have been passed down for thousands of years. And with kefir, for example, it originated in using the stomachs as pouches for carrying milk. And, people would drink out of these little pouches and, milk their animals and drink some more milk. And over time, it would sour. And after doing this for who knows how long, probably thousands of years, at some point somebody found one of these little grains, these little kefir grains, this little blob in there. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. And so then they started plopping that in the new batch, I'm sure, to see what happened. And then they realized, oh my gosh, this is creating a ferment every single time. My milk doesn't go bad. It actually stays at this really nice pH. It's delicious, and it will last for weeks this way. Fermentation is simple. With milk kefir, you plop these little grains in some milk, leave it for 24 hours, and it's done. It tastes similar to yogurt. And, all the ferments are that easy. It's just, chop and go, plop and go,
Fermentation, a simple example might be the yogurt, where we put a culture into milk and it changes the milk into yogurt. That yogurt has beneficial bacteria that continue to thrive and grow on the milk product. Another example might be cabbage, which with a little salt, thyme, and some water can be fermented into sauerkraut, and so those bacteria grow. What we want to do with the human body is nurture a beneficial inner microbiome that can be balanced with our health needs, and it's complicated.
We develop acquired tastes for foods. And something I noticed when I first started making all of those fermented foods, and I was, putting them in the fridge and selling them to people, I noticed that my roommates' friends would come over and people would try these fermented foods. And they would take a bite, and a lot of people loved it. A raw, unpasteurized sauerkraut that still has all of the probiotics present in it, it's delicious, and it tastes very different than that jar of sauerkraut that you find on the grocery shelf unrefrigerated in the store. So people would try it and they're like, wow, this is amazing, I love this. But then, a portion of people didn't like it.
When you're consuming bitter, it's not only you that are repulsed by the bitter compounds, it's going to be them as well. Not to mention, when you start consuming the bitter, the body does an entire 180 shift on how it's preparing to survive. You've got sweet, salty, sour, umami, whatever, taste buds. You've got one class of taste buds. For bitter, you have over 20. Why is that? Because bitter can kill you. If you're consuming the wrong plant at too high of a dose, it can kill you. You don't find sweet a lot. You get lucky when you have the early summer, late summer, and you got berries, right? You get lucky. Maybe a wild plum here and there, you get lucky. Oxide daisy, that's it, you're done. The rest of everything you're consuming, whether it's a root, fruit, or shoot, is gonna be sour, tangy, bitter, some sort of not sweet. It's just not sweet. Most of the undertones of what you're gonna consume is gonna be bitter. Once again, we, before having the access to refrigeration or preservation of foods, would have a tremendous amount of microbes to address.
And what really shocked me was that these people would be like, take a bite, they didn't like it, they'd leave, they'd come back a week later, and they were like, I have not stopped thinking about that. I did not like it when I tried it, but I can't stop thinking about it, and I need some of that sauerkraut. And when that happened like 25 times, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a healthy, addictive food. You know, I felt like I had found something or discovered something very interesting. And so through this work, I've really started to pay attention to what happens to people's taste buds as they bring in new foods. And I think that fermented foods like sauerkraut, that is a great way to start adjusting the taste buds and adjusting your acquired taste and flavor profile to where you can start to enjoy some of these vegetables. You know, and when you start to do that, I mean, I'm talking about a week where people's taste buds changed within a week. But for the fruits and vegetables that most people aren't accustomed to eating, I think it can take anywhere from a week to a few months.
If you went and milked a cow and you had a certain amount of milk, you drank what you could drink, and the rest of it would either spoil or you had to find a way to preserve it, right? And hence, you know, and our ancestors learned that, you know, if you by adding certain cultures, you could preserve it as yogurt, right? Like people,
Or cheese.
Or cheese, right?
Right.
But like people don't understand those logical steps, I don't think, because they've never been on a farm, right? They've just had food show up.
Okay, so historically we had a lot of these beneficial bacteria in our food that we consumed on a daily basis from a variety of sources, especially in the winters. We would be consuming pickled beets and beans and as well as you mentioned the milk products that could be preserved by making yogurt. Yogurt lasts a long time. Spoiled milk is really tough to take. Spoiled, Lactox spoiled, that's not necessarily the good bacteria. It's another type of bacteria that we need to avoid. But we learned how to do this.
So the weird thing is you can lacto-ferment with 0 IQ. All you have to do is get a pint jar, and then you just take, a tablespoon of salt, put it in the pint jar, and then start chopping up vegetables. Leave a little bit of space in the top. Chop up vegetables. One of my favorite things is dilly beans, right? So you chop up some green beans from the garden, you throw it in there, you put in I like some peppers, so I put in hot peppers, a little bit of garlic, and then I put in some dill. With that salt water brine, that's it. You leave a little space on the top, take a piece of cabbage, push it over the top to kind of keep everything down so it's not in the air, so it's under the water. And then you put a little lid on it, right? And you put it on top of wherever, cold, dry place, warm place. If you're not in the Arctic, you should be fine. It will ferment over time. Burp it every couple of days so it doesn't explode the container, right? Cap it back up. 7 days later, 8 days later, depending on the temperature or where you're at, you've got an incredible, simple, lactobacilli-rich probiotic supplement right there. So it doesn't make any sense why everybody doesn't do that.
I started going crazy and fermenting everything. I was culturing butter. I was fermenting gallons and gallons of sauerkraut to the point where I started putting extra sauerkraut in a fridge in my garage and people would come over and buy it. I was making so many different ferments. I would say I started to feel a difference with the fermented foods within about 24 hours. And it was just a feeling. It was just like a settled feeling in my gut. And within the week, I noticed that I had lower sugar cravings. And at this point, I was like an ice cream-aholic. My body was just like, sugar, we need it all the time. And I'd try not to eat it. But it was more than willpower. There was something imbalanced. I'm working on getting more in touch with my body. I think that one of the biggest lessons I learned through this was as you heal your gut, what you're actually doing is you're tapping into your gut intuition around food, around what to eat, around how to live your life, around what you want to do. This is so important to develop your gut intuition because if you don't develop that and you don't listen to it, you end up really unhappy, right? And then you're stressed and then you get sick. So it's this way of training and learning how to kind of stay on this razor's edge of your intuition. And I really believe that you have to heal your gut to hear your gut.
It feels like we burned down a library of essential wisdom with modern food manufacture. All this wisdom taking natural foods through the magic of fermentation to create life-supporting health benefits for us, gone to a generation of sodas and processed junk. Ferments are a big part of the interconnected microbiome solution and an important element for you to include in your life. we've created a comprehensive fermentation guide with background, recipes, and an ingredient list for you to begin fermenting at home. I consider this life medicine, and it's a big part of what can help you bring vitality back in your life. Here are some common fermented foods. Yogurt, which is the one most of us know about, uses bacterial starters in boiled milk. Kombucha, a fermented tea that started with what's called a SCOBY. Kefir, a particular type of yogurt out of Bulgaria known for its ties to longevity. Kimchi, a traditional Korean ferment of cabbage and spices. Sauerkraut, a traditional European cabbage ferment, although its origins are much older. Some notable others are miso, vinegar, tempeh, natto, dosa, and several others. All right, so what do we eat? That's the central question, isn't it? Eating is the easiest, quickest, and most effective way for us to impact our guts. 3 meals a day we get to take control and shape our health. It's all about what we eat, when we eat, and how we eat. Let's look at what our experts are recommending for a microbiome-friendly diet.
I grew up eating the kind of diet that my mom believed was the healthiest for our family. My mom was not a researcher, she was a busy woman with 3 kids, a 4th if you count my dad. And so she fed us the healthy foods that were sort of prescribed to the American people by the powers at large. Growing up, we ate foods like margarine. There was always that big bottle of corn oil by the stove. If food products were low fat and had no cholesterol, they might as well have been health foods in my family. And so these foods, when they're ultra processed, they become stripped of the nutrients that our microbes have evolved to consume. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors likely consumed about 150 grams of fiber per day. Today, your average American consumes about 15 grams of fiber on a good day. So what that's essentially doing is it's starving our microbial friends. And what happens when we cut fiber out of our diets is that the mucosa of our large intestine becomes thin.
The intestines and the microbiome within it should look like this organic garden, right? We should have all of this life thriving within our gut. You can imagine a great compost pile, if you've ever seen a compost pile. It will diminish any food scrap that you throw in there in 14 days down to good black soil. You need some oxygen, you need some worms, you need some bacteria, you need some fungi, you need all this microbiome to come in there and break it all down. Well, that has to happen very quickly in the human gut. You've got to take your food from what it looks like on the plate to what it looks like complete soil. You just look like what's passing in your toilet. What's passing in your toilet just 12, 14 hours later looks like soil. You've got, great brown composted material that just may have been carrots and celery and kale just a few hours earlier. That's the density of the microbiome in the human gut. There's so much microbiome there to do that rapid composting process. Go back to the farm now to grow a plant. You've got these root fibrils that are digging into that rich soil to extract water, micronutrients, macronutrients for growth. If you look under a microscope at the lining of the intestines of the human, same thing. Microfibrils stretching into the compost of the gut to extract water, micronutrients, macronutrients to pass into the bloodstream and ultimately to go build a human body and fuel it for health and success. And so it seems weird that the behavior of our farmers would be having such a direct effect on human health until you start to realize we are what we touch, really.
So once I really came back into my body whole and healed, I was on this journey to understand how the body not only heals, because it was such a mystery. It wasn't the physician that healed me in that case. And so I really dove deep into nutrition, and I found this kind of traditional method of eating that instead of like a fad diet, which I had tried many of those, like the low fat of the late 80s and 90s and things like that, the low fat, high carb diets, I learned that the more traditional method of eating, like well-rounded foods from grass-fed sources and cultured traditional foods like sauerkraut and kefir and yogurts. Dr. Weston A. Price and his teachings. He was a dentist that traveled all around the world and noticed that these indigenous populations had less disease, had better formed bone and facial structures, had really healthy teeth.
Diet has a huge impact on health. That's something we've known for a long time. And the microbiome, because when you're consuming food and it's basically going through the digestive tract, the first basically area or factor that interacts with it are the microbes that are sitting there, and they can actually change the components of food. So some of these foods that are undigested, such as fibers, when they get down into the lower digestive tract, they basically break these components down. They can break down carbohydrates, they can break down fats, they can break down proteins, they can even break down the drugs that we're consuming and the supplements. And so they're basically affecting the activity, usually in a good way, not always. Sometimes they can have negative effects, but that has a huge effect on our health. So basically the effect of food on our health is largely mediated through the microbiome.
Someone smart once said to me, don't let perfect be the enemy of really good. And I think there's some broad brushstrokes around nutrition that aren't that mysterious. You see all these articles in the New York Times or wherever that nutrition is a mystery and no one agrees. And I just don't think that's true. We know that refined sugar, refined flours, processed foods, we know that these are toxic inputs to the body. And so a lot of it is about removing them. The second thing is looking at food allergens. It's not that difficult to pinpoint. If you cut out dairy and your asthma and your acne go away, and then you reintroduce it and they come back and you do that a couple times, I think you have your proof point. It's just not that complicated. I think what hasn't been happening is that people aren't asking the right questions.
And so what are the right questions to ask?
What are you eating every day? What medications have you taken over the course of your lifetime? Were you born C-section or vaginally? Because we know that has long-term implications. When did your symptoms, whatever they may be, start, and what was happening in the context of your life at that time? I had a patient who had chronic, horrible, debilitating migraines. She had gone to every top New York headache center, neurologist, Botox, you name it. She was on 6 drugs. Nothing was controlling the migraines. No one had asked her what she was eating, and no one had noticed that she was drinking about 40 ounces of coffee a day. We slowly, because stopping 40 ounces of coffee a day might be rough, we slowly titrated her off the coffee, and her migraines have almost entirely gone away. So it's just looking broader and asking, what is the context of this person? Have they had a lot of antibiotics that might have disrupted their microbiome and we need to replete that? Do they have a major stressful event like a surgery or a trauma or a interpersonal stress that could have created something called leaky gut or intestinal permeability and triggered their autoimmune process? It's asking these questions and looking at the whole person, and then that allows you to put the pieces together.
The microbiome is to the gut what a beehive is to honey, right? So let's look at a beehive, right? A beehive needs to certainly have a colony, and you need to have a food source, so all the flowers, and you need to have a water source, and you have to have a way of being able to care for that beehive without interrupting its work. And you have to have the right temperature. If you translate that into your microbiome, the microbiome's main function is to be able to assist you in elimination, in processing of your food and elimination. The beehive main function is to make honey, right? And to be able to, once the honey is made, then to start the whole process again. So what happens to that beehive if you spray it with pesticide? It cannot do its job. When it's not able to be optimized, bad bacteria then infiltrates your microbiome. So the microbiome now is infected by this bad bacteria that takes over, no different than bad insects coming into a beehive and killing it because it infiltrated there. I think we are finally beginning to understand the incredible power that this beehive structure has in our body. I think we are still a long time away from understanding the depth of it, but certainly we are much closer to it than we were before.
More than 80% of the corn, soy, and canola in the United States today is genetically engineered. And a lot of people are asking, what's so bad about GMOs, and what does it really mean? Well, some people think GMO means God move over, but it actually means genetically modified organism. And GMOs are not developed to get higher yield or more drought-resistant crops or better flavor or nutritional profile. They have been developed, and this is the case for 99% of what's on the market today with these crops, for one of two traits. They're either resistant to herbicides, which means that plants can be sprayed with herbicides and they won't die, but the weeds will, or they are pesticide producers, which means they produce insecticides in every cell of the plant, so that bugs will take one bite of the plant and their stomachs split open and they die. They're literally living pesticide factories. So that's what we've got from our genetically engineered crops. And let's look at these things for a second. If we are spraying our crops with all this glyphosate, which is an herbicide, glyphosate production has risen dramatically, and that's made Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, very happy and very profitable because they make the GM seeds and they also make the herbicide. We're spraying our crops with this stuff, and glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen. It's an endocrine disruptor. And it's an antibiotic. A lot of people don't realize that, but it's actually been patented as an antibiotic. It kills bacteria. We know this. So what's the impact of eating food that's been sprayed with large amounts of glyphosate, which kills bacteria? Well, we don't know for sure, but I'll tell you what. In the generation since widespread glyphosate use started coming into our contact with our food supply, we have seen a massive increase, 5-fold increase in hospitalizations for food allergies amongst our kids. Do you know anyone who's sensitive to foods, who's dealing with issues like leaky gut or autoimmune disease or other ailments that might be connected to digestion? Well, guess what? Turns out that glyphosate could be a fueling cause, wiping out good bacteria and also creating a bad environment for that fuels more of the bad bacteria. This is a serious issue. And if you're serious about doing something about it, my top recommendation is to steer clear of GMO crops. Corn, soy, cottonseed oil, canola oil, only eat these crops if they're organic. Ditto with sugar. Sugar cane is not genetically engineered, but beet sugar is. Half our sugar supply in the United States comes from GMO beets.
If I could sort of go back in time, I would have gotten rid of all the processed foods in my house. I would have added in a lot more organic vegetables. I would have gotten rid of the inflammatory oils that my family grew up consuming. We actually now know that omega-3 fish oil can actually shift the microbiota in a positive direction, can actually influence the microbes that live in our large intestine. What that tells me is that fat plays an important role in our gut microbial ecosystem.
So let's make sure that we're eating more vegetables and more fiber. A more plant-based diet where protein is not the main food on the plate, but maybe is a quarter of the plate. Let's make sure that we're avoiding foods that we're sensitive to. Let's make sure we're not overdoing alcohol. Let's make sure we're not overdoing drugs. And let's make sure that we're just trying to do what we love professionally, that there's some joy in our lives.
So the microbiome is like a part of our body. And how well it's doing is reflected in how well we feel. So paying attention to it is a good idea. And one of the things that's important to remember, I think, about the microbiome is that we have evolved to benefit from fiber fermenters. They protect our gut lining. They produce all of these important molecules that our body needs to make compounds like serotonin. So feeding those microbes is, to our benefit. You're not going to. It's in a way kind of silly to take prebiotics. To take a pill that's a prebiotic pill. An apple is a prebiotic. You can find out what's present, but it doesn't. It's not that. It doesn't really necessarily tell you that much about the state of your health, because it's a picture of one movement. Every few days, all your microbial populations are changing constantly based on what you eat, Did you eat a whole lot of meat for a few days in a row? Did you have to take antibiotics? What other chemicals are you taking?
One of the solutions for everything that we're talking about is, of course, eating good foods. We know that the root vegetables, whether you're talking about a carrot or a radish, or you're talking about a potato or a yam, the root vegetables are storage forms of prebiotics. They're storage forms of foods for microbes. That's why they're there. They're constantly feeding things in the soil. So if you eat those root vegetables, you will be feeding your microbes. But it's not just that. It's also the pigments. It's also the greens in the leaves. It's the carotenoids in the leaves. It's a lot of the different things that you get what's called polyphenols, flavonols. You can pull these things in and consume them, and they help feed bugs, helpful bugs in your intestinal tract. So if you could make your own garden, you would solve a lot of these issues.
And I've been on long-term courses of antibiotics, and I know that these things insult the microbiome without a doubt. But I think that trying to consume foods that are fresh or grown by yourself and trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle, including walking and movement, I think that goes a long way to your health as we're starting to understand exactly what the microbiome is. Luckily, in my opinion, I think the study of the human microbiome has created tremendous opportunities globally to understand these bugs and what they mean and what they do and how they contribute to different diseases. I think the possibility of coming up with novel diagnostics and therapeutics is just unbelievable.
In the sense that this microbial universe can sort of modulate our body's immune systems and inflammatory responses, I think that's incredibly compelling. The other way that the microbiome influences our brain function and ultimately our brain health is by way of the myriad of chemicals and vitamins that they churn out when we feed them appropriately, that they then release into our bloodstream. So we essentially have this drug factory. I mean, people today are interested in smart drugs and nootropics and things like that, right? We basically have that in our large intestine working for us. All we got to do is feed them the right foods.
If you take, for example, something as simple as a urinary tract infection, we're still culturing these organisms, and hopefully we'll get to a point where if somebody has a urinary tract infection, you could sequence right away, look at the microbes that are there, and figure out the correct antibiotic to administer.
Some of my worst IBS clients who have terrible intestinal issues are from cities. Most people who are walking in the woods or planting their own gardens, they don't have these issues. Not only do they get exposures to the bugs, but they get exposures to the vegetables that come from the gardens that feed their bugs. Right? So this is the solution right here. See if you can grow your own garden.
So I think from the perspective of developing new diagnostics that can define the route towards therapy, that to me I think is one of the main benefits that's going to come out of this field. I don't think the question of what to eat to have a perfect microbiome is a simple one, based on the data I've seen.
In the United States, we have a commodities crop subsidy system in which we taxpayers provide tens of billions of dollars in subsidies to things like high fructose corn syrup, factory farmed animal products, processed junk, which tilts the marketplace and makes real healthy, wholesome foods effectively more expensive. So it's like you're being fined for wearing your seatbelt. Twinkies has 14 ingredients that are subsidized by taxpayers. Carrots have none. So when you get right down to it, I think we have to fight an uphill battle if we want to do the right thing for our bodies. That's why we've got this terrible tragedy that Whole Foods is equated with taking your whole paycheck. But the reality is that even in this context, you can still affordably do the right thing from your body and your family when you choose to cook more at home, when you choose to cut out waste, when you choose to focus on less processed junk, and also when you recognize the real long-term cost. Because last time I checked, cancer was pretty expensive. Heart disease was pretty expensive. Feeling chronically fatigued is pretty expensive. So the bottom line is if you really want to invest in your health and your wellness, if you want to have vitality and energy and mental clarity all through the day, the number one thing you can do is to eat real good, healthy food.
Can you tell your Rocky Road story?
My grandfather founded an ice cream company. It was called Baskin-Robbins, and my dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. He was groomed to one day join in running the family company, but when he was in his early 20s, he was offered that chance, and he said no, and he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to, as we jokingly say in our family, follow his own rocky road. And he ended up moving with my mom to a little island off the coast of Canada, where they built a one-room log cabin and they grew most of their own food, and they lived very, very simply. I was born in that cabin to parents who were practicing yoga and meditation for several hours a day and who were naming their kid Ocean. And I grew up with a lot of healthy food in my life. I'm very grateful for that. When I was 10, our family moved to California, and my dad ended up writing a book. It was called Diet for a New America, and it inspired millions of people to look at their food choices as a chance to take a stand for the health and the life that they want. The media had a lot of fun with the story. They called my dad the rebel without a cone. He inspired millions of people, and one of them wound up being his own father, my grandpa, Irvin Robbins. My grandpa had lost his brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, when my dad's Uncle Bert was 54 years old. My dad's Uncle Bert died of heart disease. He was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history. He had a family he loved, but he didn't have his health, and he left his wife a widow and his kids fatherless. So when he was in his early 70s, my grandpa was on a pretty similar path. He was heavily overweight. He was dependent on heart disease meds and diabetes meds to stay alive, and his doctors told him he didn't have long to live, unless he made big changes. And luckily, these doctors knew a thing or two, and they handed him a copy of my dad's book, A Diet for a New America, which amazingly, my grandpa read. He followed its advice, and he got the results that we see consistently and predictably from these kinds of changes. He lost 30 pounds, his golf game improved 7 strokes, he got off all of his diabetes and blood pressure meds, and he lived another 20 more healthy years. It fills me with hope. You know, no matter how much you're hurting or suffering right now, no matter how much you're in pain, there's hope, and you can do something.
Making good decisions for ourselves can change our life and our life expectancy. Remember, every time you dine with your family, you should ask, where's this meal coming from? What's it growing in? And what's growing in you? Here are some general guidelines for how to eat a probiotic-friendly diet. Let's start with what to eat. Indigestible plant fiber is very important. A couple good sources are lignin and cellulose. Polyphenols are also key in rebuilding gut lining and supporting healing. These include cloves, cocoa powder, blueberries, blackberries, and plums. And fermented foods, you'll be hearing about these a lot. We mentioned a few of these in the last segment, like yogurt, kombucha, kefir, kimchi, and sauerkraut. And again, we've put together a beautiful guide on many more of these for you in the resources. And a few foods to avoid would be gluten, dairy, sugar, alcohol, and farm-raised meats because of all the toxins and antibiotics they use. Again, we've assembled a more comprehensive list in the companion guide along with the home fermentation guide. The key is to know what's good for you and keep the colorful vegetables flowing in your diet. Avoid the toxins and harmful foods, and always work to feed the friendly bacteria in your body as an overall strategy for longevity and better health. Want to support our quest for eliminating chronic disease through the power of the microbiome? Click the button below this video and check out how to get the full Interconnected documentary series, plus a collection of exclusive bonus resources. Right now, you get the entire package at a massive 50% discount, but only during this live launch. You'll get lifetime access to everything you've seen here in the episodes, plus companion guides, extended uncut interviews, and the How to Live Probiotically guide that helps you put to work everything you've learned here in the series. Plus, you get a home gardening guide and our home fermentation guide. But you can only get this set at the massive discount as long as this launches live. Put the power of the microbiome into your own hands. Order the Interconnected at-home set right now, risk-free. Okay, back to the episode. Healthy soil leads to healthy food, leads to healthy people. These concepts are heavy because they challenge the very way we live. Modern living has brought some amazing things, but has also cut us off from nature in a profound way. The good news, we can reconnect very quickly by changing the supply chain of our food and picking better ingredients in our day-to-day. Health isn't derived from medicine. It comes from healthy food and a healthy lifestyle. It's not about taking probiotics, but living probiotically. Thanks again for joining us here. Remember, every decision you make either moves you towards more life, health, and abundance, or away from it. You are in the driver's seat, and these are your decisions to make. We've captured all this wisdom and compiled amazing resources to help you on the journey, but it's on you to take the next step. Thanks again for being here.